www.anxietycenter.com.
This is Bo.
Hi, Bo.
I realized that I've got an appointment at 11, and I'm really not going to be able to be here for the whole session. I'm unfortunate that I can't do that.
Yep.
So I appreciate it, everybody letting me in here for for what's, I guess, half an hour max. I joined Anxiety Center 4 years ago. I had general anxiety disorder. I had a lot of trouble and worked my way out of it and got myself largely, I'd say, completely free of through the level 1 improvements, and was back to pretty much living my life normally, and had every now and then some bouts with hyperstimulation that would pick back up. But I'd gotten used to those things being hiccups that I would just sort of wait out and they would chill out. So more or less just did fine. And then about a month ago, I had a hyperstimulation bout that didn't go away, and I started wrapping myself around the axle again and went plunging right back into anxiety disorder again. Sure. So then, but this past month or so since that happened, there was a period there where I wrapped myself up and where I thought I had bigger problems, like my brain was broken again, that kind of thing. And then started realizing, no, I'm doing something wrong here. And sure enough, I came to the conclusion within a few days that really I'd never cured myself of my fear of fear. And that root fear that I would just like could not stand being around fear, and that if it showed its head that I would get really scared again. And I then reflected back on my life in the past couple years where I would have called myself largely cured, and I noticed that, oh, wow, I actually was still living a fairly aversive life where I just did not want to be around fear when it showed up. I would come up with procrastination exercises to sort of avoid things. You know, I'd go right to a screen, or I'd get myself out of the house to go do something whenever I felt a little uneasy. And so kept my stimulation levels down, kept the fear down, but I wasn't really at that level 2 improvement that you would say is necessary for full healing. So this past month has been really illuminating, and I've really decided to take this head on. I'm going at looking at fear. I'm spending a lot of time sitting and watching fear arise, and how there's a distinction between what fear is and what symptoms look like, and what thoughts look like when they come up around fear, and getting myself much more used to the idea that fear can be there and I don't have to necessarily react to it. And then I've also been exposing myself to trying to put myself out there to do things that I would normally procrastinate about, and show myself that, yes, I can, in fact, do those things, even if fear were to arise. But it's been somewhat still stuck. And it was only just recently, we're talking in the past week or so, where I really started looking much more closely at containment again. And it was there that I really started seeing that if I told myself, I gave myself a buy on this and said, all right, I'm going to actually stop worrying. I'm going to just really let it go. I give myself permission. And I think that was a really important part to the decision intersection. Not just saying, stop, calm down, choose, and then choose something. It was stop, calm down, ask myself, is there permission here to try something that would be a little odd or scary? And then choose if I got the permission back that I was okay to do it. And then to go forward into saying, all right, I'm not going to run some fearful thoughts right now. I'm going to let go of everything. And it's actually, honest to God, I really honestly don't think in the 4 years I've been at this, have I really had such clear evidence that if I really let go of the fear, that I do a containment exercise right, that it works.
Mm-hmm.
I completely, like, everything stops. And the other thing that has been really a hang up for me, that I think was a hang up last time and what was a hang up this time again, is that I didn't understand that what hyperstimulation's extents really are.
Mm-hmm.
I used to blame a lot of what actually is anxiety on hyperstimulation.
Gotcha.
I would get like, I'd get really kind of the feelings of agitation. I'd get a lot of tingling and weird sensations, and I would get, extra fear that would be amplified back from my amygdala, and all those things. Like, some of them I would like to attribute. I'd be like, oh, it's just the typical rising and falling of hyperstimulation. I just have to just passively accept this and endure it, and it'll go away eventually. But the problem was that I was really saying, this isn't it. This is something that I can't control, and it happens on its own. And now I'm really starting to see a lot more clearly that there's much less of an it there. There is an it. Hyperstimulation is this thing that just sort of comes up and is going to be there for a while. But if the containment is done right, the amount of stuff that I feel that is unpleasant is nearly zero.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of amazing. And I feel very empowered by it. I feel like I've got these, like, this direct evidence now that I have this ability to contain, that containment actually can work. And that, as Anxiety Center says, the process of using containment is really the crux. It's like, if you can do that, you really are going to master anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this belief that's growing now that I really have that at my disposal. Mm-hmm. And then there's the reason why I'm on this call.
Okay.
That easy. It just ain't that easy. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that, like, for instance, I can get to the point where I've authorized myself to say, okay, I'm going to do some containment. I choose to say, I have the power here, and I'm going to use it. I'm going to use this as another opportunity to prove to myself I can do it. And then the other voice comes back and says, okay, go ahead, do it for a couple minutes. And then I fail, and I something happens, and I don't feel quite right. And then I derail myself. And then my little voice says, see, you can't do it. and that then creates this space where doubt wants to breed. And I get this, like, condescending stuff going on where it's like, well, maybe you don't have the power, butthead. Maybe you need to be a little bit more cautious about all this, because I don't think you've got it. And that then can produce, like, ongoing anxiety for a while, or, the worry is indefinitely, obviously. But I think that my place right now is, like, my question is, what do we need to do in this circumstance when we kind of have an inkling of it? We really have the taste of what it could be if it worked. But the naysaying and the results of the testing are failures, and produce this sort of, like, it's reinforcing the belief, the earlier belief, that it actually doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're going to have that as you're building your confidence, because this is all about confidence. Repetition reinforcement builds confidence, and as our confidence grows, it usurps the old threat. That's how we extinguish fear. We just feel more confident that we can do this, don't worry about it, and move on. And so there is going to be lots of back and forths initially. It's great that you've had that taste and you see that clarity in it, but this is where the work comes in, and convincing the amygdala that, stop worrying me of this. You don't have to raise these doubts. I'm going to do this. This is the behavior I need to change. I'll be fine. And as you keep on doing that, you will get more positive experiences than negative, until your negative experiences are gone and your confidence grows and it becomes a non-issue. And this is the hard part about extinguishing fears. It's just, it takes repetition over and over and over again and time to convince ourselves that we're going to be okay. So yeah, you're going to have lots of back and forth, ups and downs, but when your successes will eventually outnumber the setbacks, and as your successes build, your confidence will build, and this will become a non-issue.
What would be your take on like say like having a regular routine through the day of being almost like kind of curious and experimental with it, and saying, I really want to try things. I want to see how well I can do this, and to kind of choose a pathway where I'm dosing myself with maybe more manageable projects that create a little bit of anxiety rather than a lot of anxiety, as a way to kind of like build up that confidence.
Sure. Oh, I agree with you 100%. We want to take easy victories, because a mistake I see regularly is when people try to take too big of a step. For example, someone is afraid of driving 200 miles outside of their town. They're used to driving 30. So when they learn about how to do this, then all of a sudden they want to drive 200 miles. So they get out 50 miles, and all of a sudden they're freaking out because it's way beyond what they're used to, and they haven't even reached their goal, so they come back defeated. So I'm a proponent of little steps, little victories all along the way, because each little victory builds confidence, which allows us to go further. And like what you just mentioned, that's what I did for my recovery. Is I tested and pushed a little bits at a time, had good success, that came back confident. Then the next day have what seemed like failures. It's like, oh my gosh, what happened here? And I learned from all of that. But through that learning process, I built my confidence, which allowed me to overcome all of my threats. So I think it's a great idea. Yeah, pick little things that you feel within reach. You might even do those for a while if you're really confident before you take the next step. But I think all of that all works toward the exposure aspect of overcoming fear.
And what would be your recommendation, like for those things in life that that are big, that you really can't do anything about, that you're just going to have happen anyway?
Well, if you can avoid the big threats at the moment and just work on the little ones, that's great. If you have to do the big threats, go there being prepared that you may not be happy with the results, but big deal, you'll get there. What can I learn in this situation? What could I have done better? If you come back and say, I really didn't do a good job, look back and say, okay, what didn't I do good here? And I used to do that all the time. I used to debrief about how I was doing, what I was doing, what I could have done better, where I kind of stepped off the rails, maybe where I should have intervened sooner on the threats, all those things, if you have to do the big ones. And I had to do several big ones during my struggle, and I didn't succeed at most of them, but I did learn a lot that helped me succeed overall.
Yeah, that quality where, don't let, what's the expression? Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Yep.
There's a lot of that where I'll get through something and I'll be like, well, that didn't go as well as I hoped. But then there are some realities that it did actually happen. I did succeed in some ways, and it's trying to appreciate those things where I met the first thing that I actually did was I chose to meet it, and I did meet it. And then I actually managed to do some other things that might have been right, even though not perfectly right.
Yeah. And that's great. I mean, taking kind of the educational approach to it. Another thing that a lot of people find helpful is sort of stepping outside of yourself and looking at the thing from an observer perspective, not from right inside you where the fear is and internal thinking, but step back and say, okay, how am I doing in this situation? Looking at myself from externally, what could I be doing differently? Where are my thoughts? And if I were a friend advising me, what would I advise myself to do? Sometimes separating ourselves that way can be really helpful in those really big, challenging times.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm thinking about just the number of times when circumstances you get derailed. say, for instance, there's one of these times where you thought you'd be able to do it, and then you have like a big anxiety flare up, and it's like, oh man, I don't know anything about what I'm doing. And then there's a real loss of confidence that happens when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those, I think I've read somewhere in your site that sometimes if the confidence is really shaken, then I guess the best thing is to dial it back. Try not to. You need to kind of back yourself up to doing simple things again.
Yeah. Yeah. Start at the basics. I think when a person really has those situations where you feel defeated and it's like, wow, I'm never going to get this kind of thing, I always want to take it back to the educational side again and say, okay, so what didn't I do well? Because if anxiety is all about, anxious thinking and stirring the body up and reacting to how we feel, what didn't I do well? Where didn't I, sort of hold the line there? Where did I jump off of keeping myself calm and jump right back into scaring myself? Because you'll find that in every situation, it'll always come back to what we're thinking about it. And if we can contain our thinking, we're going to contain how we respond to it. Now, there's certainly going to be involuntary responses, subconscious ones, but we're still in charge of our thinking. This is where it's so important to be aware of what am I saying to myself, and is that story true? And one thing we're going to talk about when we get to the worry thing is, how does this measure up to those three factors of fear, and which one can I diminish? What am I saying to myself? What's the threat? And which one of these three can I improve so I can eliminate that particular aspect of the threat? So it'll always come back to that, because fear is never random. We always have a good reason, even though we may not realize what the reason is if we're unaware of the reason. But this is, again, why recovery is so important, to understand those threats. What am I afraid of? What's going on? What can I do to mitigate this threat? Because when we don't feel afraid, we're not going to be anxious. And the best way to not to feel afraid is to go after those three factors of fear and see which one you can get rid of.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. Now, we're going to be talking about something else in the near future. There are, like when the brain sort of locks into something cognitively that it's a threat. And if you look at all the things we're afraid of, it's usually because our mind is locked on something that we perceive as threatening. And of course, when the mind locks on that, the fear center increases again, rationalization side decreases, and so it becomes a sole focus until it's solved, because, again, the emergency mechanism is supposed to help us get out of danger. It's going to do that by focusing on the threat and trying to problem solve until it's done. So, and if we don't like the feelings that come with it, you can see how they can feed each other. But one way to move away from that, or to break that pattern, to break the solely locked on focus aspect, is to touch nerve endings and sensitive parts of the body that distract the fear center away from the threat. Because when we, for example, different parts of the body have different nerve ending clusters. If you touch the palm of your hand, you'll find that it's very, very sensitive, because there's a cluster of nerve endings there. So if you were just to, gently touch your palm, two things happen. One, the nerve endings distract the fear center away from the threat. And by deliberately moving and doing that touching action, you actually engage the motor aspect of the brain, which is the cortex, where the rationalization area is. And so if a person is fearful and don't like the feelings of anxiety and don't like to be locked on the threat, just by finding a spot that you like to rub and just doing that will break that pattern for a moment and give you some cognitive control back. Tapping, the technique of tapping does this because it incorporates distraction away from the threat and in engaging the motor aspects of the brain. And so there's, your palm is a good one, the back of your hand is a good one, arm, the inside of your arm. If you rub above your eyebrow, there's lots of nerve clusters there. The temples are good, top of your ears. Wherever you find a really strong sensation, you can just do that. I like the palm because it's so inconspicuous. You can do that anywhere you are, and you're not reaching for your face. But whatever you find that you can do that in those heated moments where you're feeling like you're losing control, that can give you some of that control back just because of how it distracts the brain away from the fear center.
Yeah, I think what I've also noticed is that there's just the being able to say anything, to be in full realization that I am actually choosing to do things, even if they are mundane, like picking up a glass or, speaking or doing something like that. They're perfectly good evidence that I'm actually choosing.
Mm-hmm.
And those, if I think long and hard enough about it, I'll think hard about anything, because that's why I'm anxious. But
Yes.
but like, it is realizing that choosing to think a fearful thought really, really isn't any different from choosing to pick up a glass. It's still just articulating a part of the brain that's cognition.
Yep.
So,
Yep. And
the hard part is actually noticing when like actually seeing that I'm doing the fearful thinking. Sometimes it can be pretty masked, pretty automatic.
Yep. Yep. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one is because our behaviors are often subconscious, and typically we learn our anxious behaviors as a young child as a defense mechanism, so that becomes the default, and so it's so automatic it just kicks in. But we also have, in certain situations, where the survival mechanism will kick in involuntarily because it's identified a location we were threatened before. And sounds can do that, smells can do that. So, but if we're aware of those triggers, and if we say, okay, I'm feeling anxious, what just happened here? We can always take it back to something that triggered us. And this is why we like level 2 recoveries, because you identify your core threats, why you have them, those behaviors. We become more aware of them, so when they start, we can shut them off faster. And again, anxiety is all about worry. And when we, assess for threat, when we notice ourselves doing that, it's like, oh, wait a minute, not doing this. There's no reason to do that here. And if we shut off that worry mechanism, we shut off the fear, and consequently, anxiety dies out. So it's awareness and those things. But so I like what you're saying, testing yourself, because you will be aware of those triggers. You will be aware of what your body's doing. Doing some of the physical things I talked about earlier can help distract. And if you're working at regular deep relaxation, if a person's feeling anxious, you can say, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to go into my nice, quiet, safe place here. And you do that mentally, which is going to calm the body down, giving us back cognitive control. There's a lot of ways we can diffuse anxiety when we know what to do. And so taking those little things and working on them will really build confidence. And again, on those big ones where you feel defeated, just look back and say, okay, I failed here. What did I do wrong? And always take it back to what can you do better the next time? Because when you take that approach, we also take the threat out. Because if we're going there to say, okay, I wonder how I'm going to do, I'm going to use my tools effectively, not, oh my gosh, I'm out of control. There's a huge difference. And that's why I like the educational approach.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot for the comments, Jim.
Oh, you're welcome. Did you have any other questions?
I think I'm good. Yeah, that's a good help, and I'll just keep working on it. And I'm working with Larry, so I've got another appointment with him coming up. Okay.
Yeah, I would encourage you to really, if you're doing a lot of the right things, one thing you might want to be more aware of is those core threats. You mentioned that you become afraid of fear, and because of that, there's usually a core threat underneath that. It's not just a feeling, but there's something else there. So, and as you become aware of them, you'll be able to, knock them out of the park when they first start showing up. So that would just be an area I'd be questioning about.
Okay.
Great. Well, good luck with your 11 o'clock appointment.
Yeah, you might see me pop back in here if it's over quickly. So.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, you can pop back anytime.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.